So for this video, I'm going to be going through each of the blue improvement cards and talking about their usefulness. This is going to be a review of sorts. There won't be any ratings or scores provided. Instead, I'm just going to talk about which ones are currently good in draft or in constructed, and then I'm going to talk about why they're good, and if they're not good, what could potentially be printed in the future or what you should look out for to make them good. And yeah, that's kind of my caveat intro to these review videos. So let's just dive right in. Let's skip past the intros. Messenger Rookery is the first one. This is a 1 mana improvement. All of these improvements are just like every other improvement. You can play them in any lane, so they are cross-lane playable. This one says active, and it's on a 1-turn cooldown. Choose an ally, choose a combat target for it. And this card is okay. It is not really played in constructed because the power level is just too low for the effect. It does see some play in draft. It can be very useful there. Sometimes it can make your trades become, far more favorable. It is even better if it's paired with cards that want to take advantage of choosing combat targets. Specifically, if you draft like Bristleback, for example, this card goes up in value. So this card is what I would consider playable in draft. This isn't something that you pick high, in my opinion, but having 1 or 2 in your deck is okay, right? You're not going to want to draft every one of these that you see. There's never a scenario where you're running like 4 or 5 of these, or if you are in a scenario where you're running 4 or 5 of these, things probably didn't go well in your draft. But again, this is one of those things that it's got great utility in draft. It can really help you out in terms of making some trades go your way, and it does go up in value if you have heroes that want to take advantage of combat targets. So again, that's like Bristleback, or maybe even somebody like Ursa, or things like that. So it's okay in draft. Doesn't really see a lot of play in constructed because the value, the return on investment is just too low. And honestly, it doesn't fit Blue's overall game plan right now in the current constructed meta, which is one that is very control oriented. So yeah. Watchtower. This card is often joked about as potentially being the worst card in the game, so that alone should kind of tell you a bit about it. Watchtower, 1 mana. Whenever an enemy improvement enters this lane, draw a card. So here's why this card is not good and not like super played right now. Unlike some of the other improvements that potentially draw you cards, there is no guarantee you ever get value from this. So at least with like Unearthed Secrets or the Arena, you can play those into lanes, kind of looking ahead, cross lane plays, where you expect to get at least 1 card out of it so that it essentially cycles itself. There is no way to know whether an enemy is going to play an improvement in a lane, right? So you just kind of play this on blind faith and then hope that they don't, see that you played it, hope that they just ignore that you put a Watchtower there and they start randomly throwing improvements in that lane. So in order to get value out of this, first your opponent has to run improvements. Then they have to want to play improvements in the lane where they've already seen you play Watchtower, and then they have to do just that, right? Like there's so much that has to go right this is cheap, right? It's a 1 mana investment, but it's also a card investment, and you're likely going to get no value. Like this could just read pay 1 mana, do nothing, because that's what it's going to do like 90% of the time. So it does not see a lot of play in constructed. And when I say a lot of, I mean I've never seen it played in constructed, not even as a joke. Doesn't really see play in draft. It's just not good right now. Now, in the future, if there's ever a card that like gives your opponent improvements for whatever reason, then maybe this starts to get really good. Like maybe there's a hero that says, just put an improvement on your opponent's side of the board when they damage their tower. And why would a hero do that? I don't know. Maybe that's their passive, and maybe the hero ends up with like a signature card that says, damage the enemy tower based on the number of improvements they have. And so they have like this weird synergy, and then Watchtower works with it. Listen, I am just making stuff up right now, but I'm trying to imagine a world where Watchtower is good. Maybe that's it. I don't know, but right now it's just not great. All right, Fractured Timeline. This is a card I think is maybe underrated, and when I say that, I don't mean that it's needs to suddenly spike in value or see a ton of play. I just mean that I don't think it's considered enough. A 2 mana investment is not a lot for its effect, and it says before the action phase, give a random card in opponent's hand +1 lock. So in lock decks, in decks that want to stall, this card has the potential to really gum up somebody's hand, or at least be annoying or disruptive enough, right? If this, I mean, there's a bit of randomness involved, right? It is a random card in the opponent's hand, but if they only have 1 coup, if they only have 1 annihilation, only have 1 berserker's call, whatever the case may be, and it's on a critical turn and they want to play that card and that's the card that gets hit, that can be a really big benefit to you. And so if you play, a couple of these, and then you're also running something like Hourglass, you can see where, again, as long as you've stalled out, and it turns out blue's very good at that, you can make life miserable for your opponent. So I think that this card actually rises in value the later the meta goes, in terms of the length of a game. So right now, mono blue control decks are pretty popular, and if they continue to be popular, you might want to consider this as a tech choice, along with another card that I'll talk about in a minute, because this can really slow them down, right? If it makes it so that, you get your Bolt of Damocles off first and they don't, if it means that, they need to annihilate because you've had an impactful prey on the week and they can't because this hit it, whatever the case may be, it's good disruption, and you'll get a lot more value out of it the later the game goes. So it might be worth testing at a minimum, might be worth considering. I think that it is okay in draft. My big knock against it in draft is that it just doesn't do anything proactive. This is the kind of card that I think really benefits from building around it and having stall tools, right? Being able to run your annihilations, run at any cost, things like that. But draft is more about fundamentals. And while this can be disruptive, and I've certainly ran it as a filler card, or I've taken it and ran it in draft, it's not something I'm picking high. It doesn't do anything to immediately impact the board. It's not helping me close out a game. It is a supplementary or a utility card that you would pick later in a pack, and then maybe you run it depending on your pool. So I do think the card is a bit underrated for Constructed. But keep in mind that when I say underrated, that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be played. More I think it needs to be considered and tested. So next up we have Howling Mind. This is essentially you and your opponent draw an extra card each round. So if you have played Magic the Gathering, this looks pretty familiar because it's just Howling Mine from that game, and it is okay, right? There's not a lot of Constructed decks that want to take advantage of this right now, because most of your combo decks just have better draw tools, but maybe in the future this could become a thing. In draft, it's entirely reasonable, especially if you've got a very aggressive draft pool or a lot of cheap cards. You might consider throwing this in if you have drafted it, because then you can essentially empty your hand and reload while your opponent is struggling to recover. So it's not terrible. This is one of those situational cards, right? You want to run this when you can take advantage of it, which means you typically want a lot of very cheap cards so that you can get a lot of value and a lot of cheap cantrip effects or things like that, and then take advantage of it. So Path of the Wise. So this card is the blue path card. After you play a blue card, deal 1 piercing damage to a random enemy. I tried really hard to make this work in the closed beta, and it just wasn't good enough, even running mono blue. And it's funny because we're now in a meta right now where mono blue is one of the most popular decks in the game, and it still doesn't really see play. So I think that tells you a lot about the power level. It does trigger itself, but it's only 1 piercing damage, and because it's a random enemy, it is very, very hard to take good advantage of that 1 damage. Like, even in a lane where you have a Zeus and you really want to try snowball clearing a lane, 1 extra damage every time you play the blue card is just not enough right now. So stuff to look out for, right, in the future that might make this powerful enough in draft or in constructed, because even in draft it's pretty lackluster. If you have cards that give additional benefits whenever damage is done, like as a source, this could potentially rise in value because it's an independent source. So maybe there's a creep or a hero or something that says when an enemy is dealt damage, like, give it +1 attack, right? So you know, you play the creep, let's just say it's a creep, you play the creep, you play this, and this card deals, you know, the 1 piercing damage, so then your creep goes up +1 attack. And then maybe next turn you deploy Zeus in that same lane, and then you play another blue spell, triggers Path of the Wise, triggers Zeus, that's +1, and then +1 again, because those are individual damage sources, blah, 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 blah. You know, maybe you also run Luna in that deck. You can kind of see where I'm going. Those are the sorts of things you would want to look out for with a card like this. But right now, 1 damage is just not enough for the investment, even in mono blue decks. And I think, again, that says a lot. Next up is Aghanim's Sanctum. God, I always slaughter this when I try to pronounce it. Aghanim's Sanctum. Whew. All right. So this card is very good in constructed and in draft. In constructed, this is a backbone card for a lot of combo and control decks because it allows you to abuse highly powerful cards on really impactful mana turns. For example, you know, being able to on mana turn 6 play Annihilation and then use Sanctum and then do something else is pretty powerful. Now that would mean something would have to survive the Annihilation. So if you have a Death Shield, for example, or something like that, then that's where that happens. Not often something that occurs, but I have seen it back in the old Cheating Death days. That used to be really, really annoying. Now that Cheating Death, however, has been, you know, readjusted, rebalanced, if you will, we're less likely to see that particular combo, but you are still likely to see, like, double Thunder God's Wrath. So on mana turn 7, somebody plays Thunder God's Wrath, and then they Sanctum, and then they Thunder God's Wrath again, and suddenly, like, you've lost all your heroes, and your opponent gets to do whatever they want for, like, 2 whole turns, and that usually means you just, you lose the game. So it's just a really powerful card. Even if you never get big splashy plays from it, just having the card exist in a lane means your opponent has to play around it, right? It means that they're trying to get you to play things so that maybe then they smash the defenses on it or they do something else to destroy it. Its existence dictates the sequencing and the pace of play in the lane where it is, and that is a big deal. So the card is very, very good. It's even good in draft because, again, on really impactful turns, if you can, you know, play, like I've used it in draft to play 2 Thunderhide packs on the same turn, right? It's just really, really good. Just like when I did the green improvement review, if you're talking about mana manipulation, resource manipulation, that's typically a very powerful effect. That's what this card does. It gives you access to a large number of additional resources each turn, and those resources just generate into tempo. So it's a very good card. It's played in constructed, it's played in draft. It'll probably be around for a while. Next up we have Conflagration. This card is also very, very good. It does see play in constructed, it does see play in draft. I think it's even better in draft than it is in constructed, but it certainly sees play in constructed. Deals 2 damage to each enemy before the action phase. This, unlike March of the Machines, does not hit towers, and this is not like Ignite, so it does not deal piercing damage, but it's a great way at slowly but surely clearing out melee creeps from an enemy lane. It's a great way of reacting to a prey on the weak, making sure that that lane gets nuked before the next turn unless they have buffed it somehow. Like if they do the Prey on the week and then the Emissary combo, something like that, that's a different story. But it's just a good proactive and reactive card. You can play it proactively in a lane where if you're the aggressor, as I said, you can clear out enemy melee creeps or just enemy bodies so that yours can get through and punch the tower. If you're losing a lane, a lot of times because you can play this cross lane, you can use this to mitigate the damage that you're taking without having to deploy a hero there. So for example, in draft especially, if your opponent has taken a tower because of a disciple, and now they're planning on pushing 80 and killing your ancient, you can use Conflagration to likely just wipe out that lane, or at least the majority of it, without even deploying a hero there, and that is a big bonus to you. So Conflagration is good. It sees play in Constructed, it sees play in Draft. The real benefit, like I said, is that it can be played cross lane, so you don't need to have a hero present, and it can be proactive, it can be reactive. It's just a good quality tool when you talk about the fundamentals of Artifact. And so last up is Glyph of Confusion, and much like Fractured Timeline, I think this card's a little underrated right now, and this is one of the cards that I think could be considered for a tech choice going forward. This card is 6 mana. Whenever any unit enters this lane, stun it this round. So why is this card potentially underrated, in my opinion? Well, this card can really make it difficult for an opponent to come into a lane where you've established a presence. So one of the very common ways that people are dealing with aggressive decks right now is they're letting you kind of like either mostly win the lane or win the lane, and then when you go to push for the ancient, whatever the case may be, they kind of like put you on a leash a bit, and then right when things are about to go your way, they deploy or blink dagger or whatever a blue hero over, and then they use a nuke, right? They use at any cost. They use Annihilation, and then they wipe out your lane, right? Like, that's the stall tactic. That is the meta right now, especially after the balance change. Glyph of Confusion prevents that for at least a turn. Glyph of Confusion means that if somebody blinks into that lane, or if they get deployed in that lane, they're not playing Annihilation that turn. They're not playing at any cost that turn because it's going to stun the hero, and if the hero is stunned, then they can't play that card. Now, the way around that is currently Jasper's Daggers, right? So there is counterplay to Glyph, and so that's why I don't think you need to auto go all in on this, but I do think Glyph is still underrated because it basically means that they have to have the Annihilation or the at any cost, and they have to have the Jasper Daggers in order to make this work. And then even still, they have to hope that you don't have an answer. So this is the third part of that, right? If they do enter your lane, and you have a way to nuke their hero, them having initiative doesn't matter. You essentially make it so that even if you don't have initiative, you always have initiative in dealing with whatever they bring to you. So what I mean by that is if I've got, you know, a aggressive lane and I'm pushing to kill a tower, kill an ancient, and I've got a black hero there, and my opponent blinks in or deploys in, and then they have initiative, whether they use Arcane Assault or, again, whether they deployed there and then they just kept initiative. They have to use initiative on the daggers to clear the stun effect, and then you get your chance to respond. So you can hit them with that gank, potentially. You can hit them with that coup de grace. You can, you know, if you're playing red-black, hit them with a duel, whatever. It gives you always an opportunity to respond after they've played the daggers. So Glyph of Confusion is potentially an answer to some of the blue shenanigans in terms of board wiping. Now again, just because I say it's underrated doesn't mean I think that it has to be widely played, but much like Fractured Timeline, this is one of those cards that I think needs to at least be looked at or tested, and has the potential to be a decent tech choice in the right meta. So This card is, again, one of those cards, in my opinion, that is great at helping you keep a lane alive or keep control of a lane that you've kind of already won. I think it does a good job of that, and yeah, there you have it. So that's the blue improvements. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. You know, I ramble a lot, and I'm aware of that, and I'm trying to get better, but you know, it is what it is. Thanks for watching. I hope to catch you in the next video. I'm just going to end because I'm filming this when it's late. I'm already a little bit loopy, and I probably should have just ended this video a bit ago. So here it is, the end. Thanks for watching.